165Hz monitors still feel like a luxury item, like 360mm AIOs and RGB mouse pads, and as is the case with those exotic products, the price of high-refresh gaming monitors is falling, driven by higher demand and more intense competition from budget brands. This means we now live in a world where monitors like this 24-inch 1080p 165Hz panel from Pixio can exist at a price of under £150. So when it came to reviewing a monitor that promises to punch above its weight, I felt like I needed a PC to match. As channel regulars may have noticed, I'm not a monitor reviewer. I have eyes, and I use them to look at monitors on the daily, but these are pretty much my main qualifications. I do appreciate good monitors, however, and I like to expand my knowledge, so when Pixio approached me to look at their PX248 Pro, I decided it was a good opportunity to get my first look at a low-cost, high-refresh rate monitor. One quick disclaimer, the PX248 Pro was provided for review by Pixio. I didn't buy it with my own money. I do get to keep the monitor, but I don't receive any further payment or incentives from Pixio, and they had no input on the content of my review. Let's start with a look at the PX248 Pro's specs, and it's certainly on the premium side of budget. The 23.8-inch flat panel has a resolution of 1920 by 1080, using fast IPS screen technology for a refresh rate of up to 165Hz, a greater grey response time of 1 millisecond, and support for FreeSync Premium Adaptive Sync. IPS is known for giving wide viewing angles and good colour accuracy, and the panel in this model provides a viewing angle of 178 degrees, covering over 138% of the most common sRGB colour space, and even 102% of the professional DCI-P3 colour space. It supports HDR, yes, with a max brightness of 300 nits. On the exterior, we have a very versatile stand with height adjustment, tilt, swivel and pivot, and if that's not enough, it also has a 100mm VESA mount. There are 3 ports for connectivity, 2 HDMI 2 and 1 DisplayPort 1.2, all of which support the full 165Hz refresh rate, and, in a nice touch, the cables can be routed through a port in the stand for tidiness. There are a couple of built-in 2-watt speakers and a headphone jack, and finally, and most importantly, it has a model number that's designed to be said out loud by human beings and typed more easily than a default Wi-Fi password, which is something of a rarity in the world of monitors. Given the price point of the PX248 Pro, there were bound to be some features omitted to reach the price target. There's no official support for NVIDIA G-Sync, though most modern NVIDIA cards can support FreeSync over DisplayPort anyway. There are no USB ports at all, so no support for features like single cable operation, KVM, or even a regular USB hub. And despite the quoted HDR yes support, the 300 nit peak brightness is a bit short of what's usually considered the minimum for true HDR. In order to fully utilise this 165Hz refresh rate, you need some pretty powerful hardware, even at 1080p. But I don't do expensive stuff very often on this channel, so to that end I've put together a build that should be good for esports and some less demanding games at high refresh rates, but which can be had for about £700 brand new or under £600 used. Consisting of a Ryzen 5 5600X and 16 gigs of DDR4 3600 CL16 and an RX 6600, this should be capable of running modern games at higher FPS without completely sacrificing image quality, and should make for an excellent option for people looking to game at high refresh rates on a relatively low budget. I've used 144Hz displays for a while, and I wasn't expecting a major difference moving to 165Hz, but I did find the smoothness of motion quite striking. My Asus MG279Q is a few years old, and its FreeSync range tops out at 90Hz, so having a 165Hz display that can FreeSync right up to max refresh rate is new to me, and honestly it's pretty awesome. I'm sitting off camera left, so you can probably see the screen, and while this wasn't great either for my gameplay or my posture, it did allow me to experience the PX248 Pro's viewing angles, and they're good enough to do dumb stuff like this. Anyway, after I finished filming, I played for a little while longer in a less spine-twisting position, and found I performed about the same as I usually do on a 144Hz display, so I'm afraid stepping up to 165 probably isn't going to make you a better gamer. The PC, incidentally, is doing a pretty good job of keeping above the refresh rate in CS2. At 1080 low, it's keeping an average of around the 300 FPS mark, so you should probably choose higher quality settings if you're into that for some reason. The banding, that is the weird rainbow stripes, is not on the display in reality. Unfortunately, it's a side effect of my camera. It's the same on both the 60 FPS and 120 FPS footage. I tried to remove it in post with some filters, but unfortunately they didn't completely work. The smoothness continues in Fortnite, where FPS is well into the 200s, even in DX12 mode at low settings. The average here is 268, and 1% O's are up near 144. And there are only a couple of instances of the dreaded Fortnite stutter. The great thing about Fortnite is that you don't even need a PC this powerful to enjoy high frame rates. Thanks to performance mode, you could probably take advantage of the 165 refresh rate on a significantly lower spec PC build than this. Call of Duty Warzone is a little more demanding, and even with a small overclock to the graphics card and precision boost overdrive on the CPU, it could only average 140 FPS. Still a good high refresh experience, but this particular title would benefit more from a Ryzen 7 5800X3D or one of the new 7000 series to really have a chance of hitting the 165 mark. Moving to a couple more graphically intensive titles, not just to test high frame rates but also HDR. Forza Horizon 5 doesn't really take full advantage of the Pixio's feature set in that regard. Turning on HDR in the Windows settings menu takes a hit on the display's max brightness, so using it in a brightly lit room is already going to be a bit of a problem. And I don't feel like what I saw of Forza's HDR mode really justifies losing that much brightness. Cyberpunk has two different HDR modes, and I've included footage of both because I can't make up my mind which I prefer, but once more, this is in the context of a mode that sacrifices the overall brightness of the display. I'm certainly more impressed with Cyberpunk's implementation of HDR than Forza's, but I think if you really wanted to experience HDR, this monitor might be a little short of ideal. Regarding the PX248 Pro's image quality, unfortunately I don't have the tools necessary to validate Pixio's claims about colour range or response times. I did capture a couple of tests. My unit has no dead pixels, but there was some backlight bleed in the upper left and lower right corners, but I really needed to bump the exposure of my camera to show it, and it probably won't ruin your viewing experience. Ghosting was pretty much absent with overdrive at the default low setting, but it has two higher settings and can be turned off altogether if you want to fine-tune your experience. While I can't speak to accuracy, I can say that, subjectively, the colour reproduction is vibrant without being overbearing, and at the default setting it doesn't bias much in the way of being warm or cool. The 24-inch panel size and 1080p resolution aren't ideal for a dedicated content creation display, but I think the niche of gamers who also indulge in photography, illustration and video editing on the side would be satisfied. The UI is navigated with a button on the back, which is the same as my Asus, and so I'm very used to it by now, but the actual navigation of the menu is a little on the unwieldy side. Finally, a note on build quality. Everything feels great to hold, the plastic is high quality with only a small amount of flex. The base is solid with a metal core to the feet, lending it a good amount of stability, and is surprisingly versatile in its range of movements. As well as the standard tilt, it can swivel left and right a small amount, has height adjustments, and can pivot 90 degrees into a portrait orientation, which would be great if you needed a budget second monitor for Twitch chat or something to go alongside a larger 27 or 32-inch model. If you're interested in the PC featured in this video, I've reviewed the CPU and GPU individually, and the links to those videos are in the description. There's also a parts list down below if you're interested in the specific component choices. However, I've made some strategic substitutions as some parts are no longer available, some have been superseded, and some I'm just not keen on personally. For example, when I realised this PC would have to be on camera, I threw it into the only presentable case I had going spare, but the Antec MX410 probably wouldn't be my first choice nowadays. The same goes for the Vetroo V5 CPU cooler, which, while effective, is noisier than I'd like, and which would probably be better swapped out for something by Thermalright or Deepcool. As for the Pixio PX248 Pro, I think it earns a pretty solid recommendation. At the sub 150 price point, there are a few alternatives, some of them very well regarded, but the slightly higher price point of the Pixio is justified mainly by the versatile stand. I would say that the HDR support puts it above some of its competition, but honestly, I wasn't that impressed with its implementation, mainly because of the relative lack of peak brightness, so while it might be a nice feature to have, it probably wouldn't be the one I'd center my buying decision around. There are links in the description if you'd like to pick one up for yourself. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.